And so in Jesus' time, they're all fasting. Is Jesus fasting? No. He's having a party, and they're just having a feast. They're stuffing their face because it's a wedding. And she goes into the little room, right? Thanks, buddy. She goes into the waiting room, and she's there for just like a couple minutes, and then they call her in. She goes into the little room, right? And she's waiting for the doctor, and the doctor takes a few minutes, but finally, doctor pops in, right? And he's in there. We see the door closed. He's in there for about 3 minutes, and then this woman just pops out, and she's screaming, runs out of the room into the waiting room, and then out into the hallway, and she's just like horrified. Something horrible has happened, and so the lady that's the receptionist there, she pops up and she runs after the lady to find out what's wrong. She gets out into the hallway, and when she gets to the hallway, she's talking to this lady, trying to console her, and they bring her back into the regular room, and then this lady goes into the doctor, and she says, "You know what, doctor? I cannot believe you. That is horrible. Why would you do this? Is an 82-year-old lady, and you just told her she's pregnant." And he says, "Does she still have the hiccups?" I thought it was funny. There you go. Not funny? I don't know. I thought it was funny. Maybe not. I don't know. Hey, here's what we did last week, all right? So last week we were diving into Mark chapter 2, and what we found is that Levi, or Matthew, gets called as a disciple, all right? So that's pretty cool. But the whole gist of the thing is that Matthew is he's a tax collector, and he's a sinner. He's like a bad person, right? That's the gist of it. These guys are morally bad, and Jesus is having lunch, having a dinner, a feast with morally bad people. And that makes the Pharisees all ticked off, and they don't like it. And so Jesus makes this really profound statement at the end of it. He says this. He says, it's not the well that need a doctor. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. That's his big climax there, right? And the idea is that it is people that are sinners that need Jesus, right? So the idea, that people say, well, the people in the church, they're better than everybody else, or they think they're better than us. No, we don't. We think we're worse. You're the ones who don't think you're a sinner. I'm the one that thinks I'm a nightmare and I can't get by without having Jesus in my life, right? So that was the story that we had last week. This week, though, it piggybacks off of last week. Because there's this conversation that's happening. Remember, they're at a banquet, and there's all these tax collectors and sinners, and they're all in this place, okay? And they've confronted Jesus with, why are you so unholy? That's the gist of what they're saying. Why are you not holy like us? You eat with bad people. Via just spatial connection, being close to them, you're less holy than us. Why do you do that? Disciples, why does he do that? Why does he hang out with the wrong type of people? He must not be as holy as us. And so if you read in Luke, it's a parallel passage for today. You'll find that what we're going to read today is at the same event. Okay? It's at the exact same event. They're still there, and after he says it's not the sick it's not the healthy that need a doctor, it's the sick, he goes on and they up the ante and ask another question. Look what it says. I got my Bible upside down. Look what it says in Mark chapter 2. In verse 13, it says, "Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting." So we find out that it wasn't just the Pharisees that are there, but there's also disciples of John the Baptist that are there too. And these are kind of disgruntled John the Baptist folks. We'll get into that in a minute. But they're very legalistic. There was a group that followed John the Baptist that left John the Baptist to follow Jesus. That was what John the Baptist wanted. I want you guys that are my disciples, I must become less. Jesus must become greater. I must become less. You go follow him. And they're like, I don't like that. And so they start lining up more with the Pharisees. Okay? It says, "Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. Some people came and asked Jesus, 'How is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not?' You hang out with all kinds of bad people. That's a problem." He says, "Well, I got an answer for that. It's the sick that need a doctor, not the healthy." "Oh, yeah? Well, what about this? How's come we're all fasting and you're not?" The reason that's important is because the Jews would fast in a religious, they would do religious fasting like on a day. They would say every Monday and every Thursday they would fast. It had nothing to do with circumstances. It just had to do with the fact that it's a ritual that we do, and because we do these rituals, we're more holy. Okay? So every Monday they would fast and they wouldn't eat. And every Thursday they wouldn't fast, or they would fast and they wouldn't eat. The Bible actually only gives us one time in the Bible where we're supposed to fast. If you read in the book of Leviticus, it says, is it Leviticus? Yeah, it is Leviticus. I think so. It says that you're supposed to fast on the Day of Atonement. That was one day, and we don't even have that anymore. The Day of Atonement now is the day Jesus atoned for our sins, and so that made that obsolete. So there's no real day of fasting laid out, specifically a day for us. And so in Jesus' time, they're all fasting. What's going on? Is Jesus fasting? No. Jesus isn't fasting. He's having a feast. Instead of fasting like all the religious people are, he's having a party, eating like chimichangas and whatever else he can do with all of his buddies, and they're just having a feast. They're stuffing their face because it's a wedding. They're like, how's come? How's come? Explain this to me. Now, there's some people there that are with them that are John the Baptist's disciples. Let me read to you just something right out of John chapter 4. And this will explain a little bit about this relationship with John the Baptist and why maybe his disciples are doing what they do. It says in John 4, 1-2, it says, now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. So what happens is the Pharisees are looking at this whole thing. They're seeing Jesus over here, and they're seeing John the Baptist over here, and they're noticing, and they're competing against the two. They're looking at both of them and say, who's better? Who's more of a threat? John the Baptist or Jesus? And they notice that Jesus is starting to get more people baptized than John. His numbers are dwindling. His church is dwindling. Jesus' church is growing. And they're like, And it says, Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. He hears this. Jesus does. And so what's his response to that? Although, in fact, it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. That was Jesus' response. Jesus' response was, I'm not going to compete with John. I'm going to pick up and leave because I don't want there to be division here. I'm trying to not have there be division between my disciples and the disciples of John. John's going to lead them at the right time and do this. And the Pharisees want to put a wrench in this thing. They want to put a monkey in this thing. They want to cause division. And so if we read in John 3, verse 25-30, it says, an argument developed between some of John's disciples and a certain Jew over the matter of ceremonial washing. They came to John and said to him, Rabbi, that man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan, the one you testified about, he testified in John chapter 1. It said, look, he's baptizing and everybody's going over to him. So John the Baptist's disciples are like, hey, John, we got a problem. We're losing people. They're leaving us and they're going over to Jesus, and that's a problem. To this, John replied, a person can receive only what is given them from heaven. That is a profound statement. You only get what God gives you from heaven. You yourselves can testify that I said I'm not the Messiah, but am sent ahead of you. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine and it is now complete. He must become greater, I must become less. And so when Jesus is talking to the disciples, or when John is talking to his disciples about Jesus having more people, what he does is he says this: the bride belongs to the bridegroom. Okay? Notice it's wedding imagery here. He's saying the bride belongs to the bridegroom. and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. You just had a wedding here yesterday, right? You don't fast during a wedding. So if we showed up yesterday at Gabe and Ashton's wedding, and everybody come with all bad faces, tears, and crying, and oh, I'm so hungry, and they're fasting. Everybody's fasting. We call that completely inappropriate. It's inappropriate for the situation for us to fast at your wedding. Right? This isn't biblical. This is just common sense. All right? And then the analogy that John himself lays out. Sorry about my voice. The analogy that John the Baptist lays out himself is this of that. He says, I'm a friend of the bridegroom. I'm full of joy when I hear the bridegroom's voice. Then he says, that joy is mine now. Why? Because Jesus is here. Jesus is here with us now. And so even though John the Baptist wants Jesus to become greater and for his own ministry to become less, it appears that not all of John's disciples are in on this and agree. Right? They're not all on board with this transferring from Team John to Team Jesus. All right? They're not in accordance with that. But John did. Remember what he taught about when he was teaching about repentance? He was kind of an ascetic guy. He wasn't like an all grace kind of cat when he was talking. Remember, he was a guy that it was all about, he ate locusts, right? That's kind of a fasting type of thing, you know. You're eating locusts. That's not good. He wore like a leisure suit made out of camel hair, right? He was kind of bizarre. He was kind of very ascetic in the way he was, kind of I don't know, pushing anything good away and really trying to push repentance as make yourself less, make yourself less, make yourself less. That was his deal. And so where we got here is that the Pharisees and some of these disciples that didn't like what John had said, okay? They didn't like that. They didn't like the idea of the bridegroom. They didn't like the idea that they're not following the groom. They were following the bridegroom. And like that. They said, forget this then. We're not going over to Team Jesus. We're going to go to the people that are ascetic, the people that are about repentance, the people that are about obeying the rules and doing these kinds of things. We're going to go spend time with the Pharisees. And so in this story, the Pharisees and these ex-disciples of John the Baptist are together asking these questions. We're more holy than you because you don't even fast on fasting days. First of all, you hang out with a bunch of sinners, and then you do it and you eat with them on a day when we're supposed to be not eating at all and fasting. What the heck is wrong with you? Who is more holy, you or us? Who's more holy, John the Baptist people or yours? Obviously us. Explain yourself to us. Here's the big question. Why aren't your disciples fasting when John the Baptist's disciples and those who follow Jesus are? Inquiring minds want to know, right? Give them the answer. And Jesus is going to answer that question in 3 ways. Okay? But they all mean the same thing, so follow along with this. This is what he says. Jesus' new way of relationship with God by grace is incompatible with your old way of self-righteousness via religious rule observation. Let me say that again. Jesus' new way of dealing with God, which is by grace, okay? It's all about grace. It's all about God being nice to you. He's saying that is completely incompatible with your old way of doing stuff, which was being self-righteous and making yourself right before God by obeying all kinds of rules. He's saying these 2 ways of doing things, they don't mesh at all. You can't fit them together. You can't, like a puzzle, take some pieces from this one and make the pieces fit together. They're completely incongruent with one another. That's what he's saying. And so let's look at how he lays this out. Because the Pharisees are practicing their religion is all about external. What am I doing on the outside? It's all based on law. It's all based on works. Jesus is saying it's all about being with God. It's about a heart change. It's internal, not external. It's not about the law. It's about grace. It's about God being nice to me. And he's saying they're not incompatible. You say, how can that be? I thought that he says the fulfillment of the law. He said, didn't he say that? I came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. Let me give you just a story that I think will help you a little bit about that. Any of you guys ever had an acorn? You ever grab an acorn? See an acorn? I used to like to pop the top off the acorn. That was kind of fun. That was my favorite part. Pop the top off the acorn. But the acorn is supposed to grow into an oak tree. Okay? Now, are they related? Yes. The oak tree is the fulfillment of the acorn. Now, when you have an oak tree, do you still have an acorn? You do? You still have the acorn? Right, but once the acorn tree is grown, right, that acorn's gone. Right? You're getting new acorns, right? But what created the tree? The tree is an oak tree, and the acorn that caused that tree, obsolete. You can't even find it. You can't try to combine the oak tree with the acorn and somehow make the one that it came from and make them work together. They don't work that way. They're incompatible. They don't work. And so what they're doing is, Jesus is saying there's a new way of having a relationship with God. It's by grace. It's through faith. It's by putting your faith in what I do and not in your own self-righteous stuff. And what these people are trying to do, the disciples of John and the Pharisees and their followers, is they're trying to combine the two. They're trying to say, well, we like some of the stuff you're saying, and we're going to combine it with rules. Or on the other side, we find this in the life of Paul and in the life of Peter. They're trying to combine certain things. Say, well, yeah, it's by grace. We're saved by grace. But in addition to that, there's all these things we've got to do. Right? We want the best of both. We want Jesus and the law. We want the New Testament and the Old Testament. We want law and grace. We want it all together to work together because we want to be a part of it as well. Why? Why do we do that? We want to be a part of it as well. We're into law and stuff because law is easier. I can measure law. I can write it down. I can write down a list of stuff and say, well, I didn't do that today, and I didn't do that today, and I didn't do that today, so I must be okay. And I can measure that. But you can't combine that with Jesus. And so he gives three things. Let's watch what he says here. It says in Hebrews 8:13, it says, by calling the new covenant, this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete. Okay? That's what whoever wrote the book of Hebrews, we don't know who wrote that book, but whoever wrote that, whether it's Paul or somebody else, it says, by calling this new covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete. And what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear, like the acorn. And you can't fit this big tree, you can't fit this whole thing of grace, this big new relationship with God, Jesus. You can't fit that back into the little acorn. It's just going to burst it out. So Jesus tells some stories. Look at this. It says in verse 19, Jesus answered, how can the guests of the bridegroom? Remember who's here. These are disciples of John the Baptist. When John the Baptist was telling his disciples that they should be following Jesus and that they should be more, right? When he's telling them that, the analogy he uses is of a bridegroom. He says a bridegroom. Now Jesus is going to talk about it, and what's he going to say? First thing he says, he talks about bridegroom. You think that's coincidence? I don't think so. I think he knows what's going on, and he knows that this is the analogy that John the Baptist has used. Jesus answered, how can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he's with them? Completely inappropriate. Somebody's getting married. The groom is here with us. We're not fasting. That doesn't even make no sense. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and on that day they will fast. So it's not like he's saying fasting shouldn't happen, but fasting is not about religious ritual, about this day or that day, or if we fast on Monday and we fast on Thursday, somehow we're more holy. It's based on the situation. Fasting is based on the situation. When the bridegroom is with you, don't be fasting. That don't make no sense. But if it says like this, he's taken away from you. Let's say we're at the wedding yesterday, and all of a sudden somebody comes in, like right before the wedding, and takes Gabe and steals him and takes him away. And they come in with black suits and AR-15s, and they take this guy away. Now we can fast, right? Now we're mourning, we're sad, we're upset, we're freaking out. The situation calls for fasting. And so about a month or two ago, it was actually, I think, when Sharon had fallen off, I had a day where I called for a fast, right? Not because it was Monday or Thursday. I called for fasting because the situation within our church demanded that we fast. I think Steve, you were going, and you were going to have treatment then for cancer. We didn't know how serious that was going to be. We didn't know how that was going to work. And so that was burdening me, and I was burdened by Sharon falling, and she was going to have surgery, I think, as well. And we had the deal with the family here, and the kids couldn't come to church. There was all these things that were burdening us. And I say the situation doesn't call for feasting right now. The situation calls for fasting, to come before God and say, God, listen, we're serious about this. Our temperament is a certain way. And what's funny about this is, I don't know if you know this, but there was a law. The rabbis had a rule about weddings. I keep looking at Jeff when we talk about weddings, because he's like the wedding guy right now. He's like doing weddings like all over the place, He's but anyway, we're doing all these weddings. There was actually a rule that the Pharisees had, and it was written in the law that if there was anything, let me see if I've got it written here. Says that if any law came in the way of having a good time or expressing joy during a wedding, you didn't have to keep the law. That's how important a wedding was. If you were in the middle of a wedding and there was something about obeying the law that would keep you from rejoicing and having joy at that wedding, it was okay to not obey the law in that particular circumstance, because a wedding was so important. And here they are. And just say, which is more important? And I come to you with this. Which is more important? Obeying ritual or hanging out with Jesus? That's really what we've got here. Pharisees are like, hey, you can't be enjoying your time with Jesus and having this. It's fasting day. It's religious day. It's ritual day. Enjoying the presence of Jesus, having a relationship with Him. Is that how we work with God? We have a relationship with Jesus. We sit with Him. We enjoy Him. We love Him. We eat with Him. We have the Lord's Supper. Is that how you do it? Or is that by setting up a bunch of rules and saying, well, we're not going to eat today on purpose just to make ourselves hungry for no reason because it's Monday? Which is a better way of having a relationship with God? Jesus says the first way is better. We're going to finish up here. I'm getting close to the end, and my voice is going to be gone. Verse 20. It said, but the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will feast. It talks about violence. It goes on, verse 21. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Otherwise, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And so the idea here is that you've got, your old jeans or whatever, they've shrunk down, right? Because you've worn them a lot and you've washed them 80,000 times. And now you've got a big hole in them, but you're going to put this big honking patch on it, and you put that bad boy on there. but then it just rips the jeans more because it's not shrunk and it destroys them both. That's the idea that I don't know nothing about no sewing, right? So I don't know nothing about no patches, all right? All I know is the Bible says that in this particular case it's not good, all right? And what's happening? Jesus is introducing something new. You're going to have a relationship with me based on me being nice to you, by trusting me, not on rules. It's something new. And you can't take that new way and combine it with this old rigid way of obeying all these rules. Certain days, certain this. Oh, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. That's not, you can't combine those, because if you combine them, it ruins both of them. Okay? That's one way he tries to put it. He's trying to make the same point. They're incompatible. The old is incompatible with the new. The old is incompatible, all right? Goes on, verse 22. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour wine into new wineskins. Now, this one's a little bit bizarre because most of us who have drinking wine, we're not drinking it out of no skins, right? Like if you come up, if I go to your house, you say you want some wine, and I'm like, yeah, I'll have a cup of wine. And then you pull out like a carcass, like a big goat carcass, and you're like, hey, all right. And I'm like, what the heck is that, right? Because that's what they did. They would take like a goat, right? And they'd take it, and they would figure out a way to get the skin off without cutting a slit in it. Okay, so they would carve around and get it, and then they would take the feet, and they would sew the feet up, and they would sew the tail up, right, sew the butt up, and then they'd be all done. But then they'd leave the neck and the mouth open, right, and then they pour the wine in there. But because it's skin, it's kind of flexible, right? It's still kind of got some, it's got to, because you're putting wine in there, and wine ferments, and so it's like bubbling, and it's making the bubbles, and it's starting to get bigger and bigger. But if you do that with an old crusty one, right, an old crusty wineskin, you put it in there, the thing just explodes. And you're like, well, that wasn't good for anybody, and that was good wine, and now it's all gone, right? And so that makes everyone sad. And so it says, no one pours new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. What is he talking about? This new wine is representing, this is Jesus' way of doing stuff. It's going to be by relationship with Jesus. It's not by law, but it's by Jesus being nice to me, and I have faith in you, and I trust you, God. That's the new way, okay? And he's saying that is incompatible. If you try to take that way of having a relationship with God and put it into this old, crusty wineskin, this thing that's alive and active, this thing that's changing lives, that's getting in and penetrating your hearts, this thing that is the size of God himself, if you try to jam that into, don't eat on Monday, right? You try to jam that into, oh, don't walk this far on Sunday or on Saturday. You try to jam that in, it don't make no sense. It's incompatible. That's what he's saying. It's incompatible. That new wine and old wineskins ruins both of them. The wine's just going to be on the ground. It's going to be useless. And you think, well, this doesn't apply to us. It applies to you all the time. It totally applies to us. We do this all the time. We try to be Christian and then say, but I'm a better Christian because I've got the law over here, and I take the law and I do these things too. And so that makes me better than you, right? Oh, I'm saved by grace. Yes, I believe that. Plus, I'm also better than you because I do these certain things, and I'm here every week, and I never miss. And I give more than anybody else, and I do this, and I'm obeying these rules, and I keep my list in addition to, I'm saved by grace. But I also got my list, right? You're combining the two, and by combining the two, what you're doing is you're making this void. Because what you're doing is you're saying that Jesus isn't enough to save me. Jesus isn't sufficient. That his blood and his death on the cross was not enough. That God needs help from you. God don't need your help. God doesn't need your help. So I got a couple statements here and we'll finish up. Here's what we do. We can't be trying to combine works righteousness, like obeying fasting laws and stuff, with Jesus' grace. We try to mix God's gigantic and complete grace with our contribution of good works. God, you've done it all, but here's my contribution of good works. I'm going to help you out a little bit and make sure we get all the way over. Is your fasting like that of Jesus or the Pharisees? If you fast, or when you fast, or when we fast, is it a fasting that's a religious ritual in order to make God happy with us? Somehow please God. Oh, God's impressed. He better do what we asked him now. We've impressed God. Boy, I didn't eat a Big Mac at lunch, and so now all of a sudden, Steve doesn't have cancer. That's not how it works. We fast because it's the emotion. It's the time. God, we're earnest. We care. We're not impressing you. We just care. And we trust you. Trust you. Are you sowing Jesus' grace? Are you taking Jesus' grace and sewing it onto your own self-righteous garment? Are you doing that? Are we doing that? Taking the grace of God and sewing it onto this old garment of rules. How are we putting new wine into old wineskins? Look at your church. It's hard to get over old wineskins. You get used to old wineskins. They get crusty and they get hard and you don't want to mess with them. You're like, it's better off just to leave it alone. Let's not pour anything new into this place. Let's not pour anything new that's going to shake people up. They might get mad. They like their old wineskins. Right? Maybe those old wineskins, they're not fermenting anymore. They're not, the old wine that's in there, it's not fermenting no more. It's not changing anything. It's not got that nice taste on the lips, and people are like, I don't want that wine anymore. And then you're like, well, we want the new wine, but we want to put it in the same old package that we've had it in for the last 150 years. And then you expect that there's not going to be some problem. Doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. And so God's teaching us some things here about what grace is, what Christianity is, who Jesus is. It's one or the other. You got to pick. You just got to pick. You got to make a decision. Are you going to be a follower of Jesus, which it's by relationship with Jesus, I'm going to be a friend of God's. We're going to be friends because he made it possible for me to be friends with him. And I love him and I trust him. And it's not by anything that I do. It's all by that. Or am I going to be basing it on what I do? If I base it on what I do, it's not compatible with this anymore. They're not compatible. You got to choose. Can't combine them. Can't combine them. Come on up. We won't steal anything out of your purse, too, if you decide that you... Oh, okay. All right, it's kind of like a when you're tight roping, you got a purse to get you up there. All right. God, we just thank you so much for your word, and we thank you for what you're doing in our lives, and God, what you're doing in this church, and God, we want to see new wine all over in this place. God, we want it just to burst out into the community. God, we want people to hear your word and hear your gospel. We don't want to combine the new way, your way of having a relationship with God with an old way that's not compatible with it, with our own self-righteousness. God, we're not righteous. There's no one righteous. Romans 3. There's no one righteous, not even one. We're all crooked sticks, and God, we surrender to you. God, we know the only straight stick is you. We put our faith in you. God, impute your straightness, your righteousness, God, into our lives. We trust you. We love you. In Jesus' name.
I walked under the blood-red moon, and I've seen those wolves gather round, and And I've spent some time with the devil, but never have I found